let's start with the Pete Hegseth testimony.
Yeah.
It appeared to me, Ron, that Republicans wanted to talk about DEI hires and the Afghanistan withdrawal, didn't really ask Pete Hegseth much of anything. And the Democrats were doing what I thought they should have done, and they did do it, and question him on his judgment. It seemed like Pete Hegseth didn't want to answer any questions directly. What are your thoughts on it as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, there were some consistent themes throughout the hearing. There were a few things that stood out to me. First of all, obviously, Hegseth knew that Trump was watching because he spent most of the hearing praising Donald Trump. I think he mentioned Trump's name like 300 times. So even though the hearing was theoretically supposed to be about him, he kept bringing up Trump. And I think what he was doing there is he was sending a subliminal message to the Republican senators on the committee and elsewhere saying, I'm Trump's guy. If you vote against me, you're voting against Trump, so he was basically laying down that marker. One of the things that really struck me about, of course, they went into his alcohol abuse, his abuse of women, the fact that he's never run any organization very big. And the one that he did run was the charity that he was removed for financial mismanagement and constantly having to be carried out of events, passed out after passing out drunk, and also having a sexual harassment lawsuit filed against the organization as well from a woman who was apparently taken to a strip club and harassed by one of the other members of the charity. But, the two things that disturbed me the most about his testimony, and by the way, I thought some of the Democrats were not very good. Some of the Democrats were okay. I thought that the one that stood out to me was Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan. I thought she was excellent. But I thought some of the other ones, to be honest with you, weren't very good.
I thought Kane was okay. What do you think about Kane? I thought he did a good job.
Who?
Kane.
Yeah, Kane was good. I would say Kane was second best, and probably Mark Kelly, who focused on the alcohol stuff, was probably third, in my opinion. Those were like the top three throughout. I thought Slotkin was good because he kept trying to interrupt her and she wouldn't let him. So I thought that was good. But the things that stood out to me that really bothered me about his testimony was on the war crimes issue. He is one who lobbied Trump to pardon some guys who were convicted of war crimes whose fellow soldiers turned them in and testified against them that they had committed war crimes. And Hegseth is against all war crime prosecutions. And he even said, we need to defer. We need to stop listening to the lawyers and the people in the Pentagon who put in all these rules of engagement to minimize civilian casualties. We need to trust the war fighters. He actually used the word, we need to defer to the war fighters when it comes to war crimes. In other words, basically just anything goes, whatever they want to do, they need to do, which sort of made me think of Lieutenant William Cawley back in Vietnam, who, I think single-handedly killed like 105 civilians in a village and was prosecuted for war crimes. And that was a big thing where a lot of Republicans were defending him back in the day, in the 70s. He kind of reminded me of those people who were defending Cawley back in the early 1970s. So that was one thing that stood out to me. The other thing was the questioning about Mark Esper and them pointing out like that, Trump wanted to use bring in the 82nd Airborne and shoot protesters in the leg in DC. And Esper refused those orders and said that violates the Constitution. I'm not going to do it. And Trump fired Esper very shortly after that, after almost like 2 weeks after he did an interview and apologized and said it was a mistake how they handled themselves during the DC protests with Trump holding up the Bible and stuff. Trump fired Esper. And so this guy, Hegseth, was asked, like, what would you do if Trump ordered you to do something illegal like this?
Right.
And he just basically just said, I'm going to do what Trump tells me to do.
Yeah.
So I thought those were the two things that stood out to me. The alcohol stuff was, I thought, a little bit surprising how he handled that. Some Democrats, I've heard them say, the alcohol issue is not really an issue. That shouldn't be brought up. There's other more important things, but I do think it's an issue because look, we're talking about a guy who had 10, 12 booze bottles in his office that are we've pulled photos of different years where there's different bottles. So there's a constant rotation of liquor bottles going in and out of his office that are like half full. He claims he's never drank at Fox, but he's got, a dozen half empty liquor bottles in his office. He's had many Fox employees who have said he showed up to work drunk, hungover on the job. Many different employees for the charities that he worked in say that they had to carry him out of events passed out drunk. So, and he denied all of that. So those are the things that stood out.
I think he has a lot in common with Judge Jeanine, but I'll leave that one alone. What do you make of the fact that not that long ago on a podcast, he says he doesn't believe that women should be serving on the battlefield, but yet now all of a sudden we're led to believe that he just changed his mind and he had a change of heart? I mean, obviously the only reason why he's changing his tune a little bit now is because he wants to get this position, but how could anybody believe he's being honest in saying that today?
He wrote it in his book last year.
Right.
His book came out last year and he said women should not serve in combat, period. And he used some pretty insulting language while saying that, basically just suggesting that no woman is capable of serving in combat. And, he changed his position for one reason. Joni Ernst. Joni Ernst is on the committee. She's a senator from Iowa. She served in combat herself. Right. She's also a sexual assault victim, and he's been accused of that as well. So she was seen as the biggest problem for him in terms of if she came out publicly against Hegseth, he was in big trouble. And so Hegseth basically went into her office and just took back everything he ever said about women in combat. And I guess now we're just supposed to believe that he's like had a change of heart on all this when everybody knows he's just saying that because Joni Ernst has made him come out and publicly said that. But, can we rely on this person to not be discriminative on promotions and all of that of women? Absolutely not. I mean, we know what he thinks.
Ron, if he actually gets confirmed, and I certainly want to get your opinions on that. I don't even know what's going to happen here, but if he does, hypothetically speaking, what does it say about the Republican Party today?
Yeah, well, Joni Ernst, I think, is going to support him because all of MAGA realized that she was the problem, and they all just went, they focused in on her, John Cornyn, and a few others. And that this is the problem when you have only 2 or 3 Republicans who are kind of been identified as going against Trump, then they can all focus on those handful of people and bring a lot of that pressure and the threats and all of that to bear on them. And, they curl up in a ball and they give in. And that's what I believe has happened with her. So I think that what you might see is 1 or 2 Republicans vote against Hegseth, but I also think you're going to see 1 or 2 Democrats vote for Hegseth. And so I think he'll, be confirmed by 5 or 6 votes.
Unbelievably scary that this is the guy that's going to have the nuclear codes along with Donald Trump. I mean, it's unbelievable. A guy that was a weekend anchor at Fox News.
He has pledged, though, that if he is confirmed as Secretary of Defense, he will stop drinking. So we have that.
Yeah.